Now, this next topic, we have kind of touched on it a little bit before, but I really wanted to get into it tonight. And today I actually went into spent a little bit of time doing a little bit more research on this, so I'd be better prepared to talk about it. So, if you have a Nintendo 3DS or 2DS, not one of the new ones, you are able to download Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, NES games, and I think a handful of Genesis titles that have been redone in 3D. But what you can't do is you can't download and play Super Nintendo games. You can if you have a new 3DS. So, my question is, what is preventing a normal 3DS from running a Super Nintendo game? Do you know, Matt? Do you know what's preventing the 3DS and 2DS normal versions from running a Super Nintendo game?
Nintendo wanting to make more money?
That's it. That's the only reason. See, when the original 3DS launched, it launched at $250. And I bought a launch unit. I want to say it was definitely less than a year later, they actually lowered the cost from $250 to, I want to say, about $170, which is a huge price drop. But the system was not selling well, and they wanted to make sure that even though they were coming out with, I think at the time, Mario Kart 7 and Super Mario 3D Land, they still wanted to give people even more reason to buy it. And when they did this, if you were one of the people that purchased a 3DS at that original price, they gave you, I want to say, an ambassador's rewards program. And before they even allowed you to download NES games on the eShop for 3DS, they gave you 10 NES games, and then they also gave you 10 Game Boy Advance games to download. And I went through, I've still got them on my 3DS. One of the more favorite ones that I played was Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, which was my first Fire Emblem game that I've ever played.
So was mine.
So yeah, it was fun, and that took a lot of time playing that game.
Those games are not fast.
Right. So this is and for some reason, this boggles my mind, because you can download Game Boy Advance games on the Virtual Console on a Wii U. You cannot, for some reason, download them on a 3DS, even though they work perfectly fine. Like, as far as I know, this is the only way to play any Game Boy Advance games on a 3DS. You have to be part of that ambassador program, and even if you change, you get a new 3DS, you can still transfer those over. But you can't even buy these titles, and that always struck me as really weird. And Sega has made Genesis games for download, and the difference between Genesis and Super Nintendo is fairly negligible. If one thing can emulate Genesis, it can also emulate Super Nintendo. But I went ahead and I looked up the difference between Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo specs, because Super Nintendo was a 16-bit system, Game Boy Advance was a 32-bit system. And it turns out my suspicions were correct. The Game Boy Advance, with the exception of resolution of the screen, I want to say Game Boy Advance is only like 240 by 160. Super Nintendo is roughly twice that resolution, screen resolution. Higher resolution, the more processing power to create the graphics and all that stuff. But even if you don't look at the resolution, all the other specs, whether it is processing speed, memory, um, color, all the specs were either identical on the Game Boy Advance or much more advanced than a Super Nintendo. I think the Super Nintendo had a dedicated sound chip to it, whereas the Game Boy Advance either does not or does not have quite as sophisticated as one. And that's my only complaint with Game Boy Advance games. Their sound can be a bit weird at times. Like the instrumentation of the of the music is it's a little off. Some games it's not as bad as others, but there's my point is there is zero reason why there's no reason to keep my 3DS, which can play Game Boy Advance games, from downloading Super Nintendo games. The only reason to do this is, like you said, Nintendo is just giving you another reason to buy a new 3DS instead of just holding on to your original one. When it's fully capable of doing that, it's fully capable of playing Super Nintendo games. And from what I can tell, there's no plan to make these Super Nintendo games available to any other system except new 3DS. And they have also, they haven't really been releasing Game Boy games for download either. So as far as virtual console releases go, I might be done because I don't plan on buying a new 3DS. And I'd love to play, Super Mario World, Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country on my 3DS, but I can't because of this obnoxious decision that Nintendo has made. And it's just, to me, you're just throwing out sales at this point, Nintendo. All you're doing is you're making it so that you're splitting up your user base. This is the problem that I have with this whole incremental upgrade. When they released the Game Boy Advance SP, they didn't make it so that certain games would play on that one that would not play on the original Game Boy Advance model. Even Nintendo 64, which had the expansion pack, those games, I think, there were some games where the expansion pack was required, but they usually actually gave you the expansion pack, like Donkey Kong 64. So, this is just one of those decisions where I'm like, it doesn't make any sense other than for you to make more money, and it's obvious that that's your motivation in making this decision. But did you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason for it. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this. Not to say that it isn't like something that isn't worth complaining about. Like, it's a big thing to complain about because when I got my 2DS, I bought it used, but it's was still in pretty good condition. It's still in really good condition. And I got it for an amazing price. I got it for like $121. Um, and I was really excited because I was able to play, newer games that actually, I don't think I had a DS at the time. Um, but yeah, like I wanted to play X and Y. I wanted to play Ocarina of Time and well, at the time Majora's Mask wasn't available, but I could have played it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a bunch of new games that I couldn't play, but now I could play them. And then, like Nintendo normally does for their, portable consoles, a new version was coming out like 2 years after the 3DS was a thing, and it wasn't even like a huge thing. It was just the name of it was literally just new 3DS. And the differences were there was a little analog stick that you could use, kind of like a C stick for GameCube controllers, and I guess
It's a quad core. You basically have the same processor, but instead of it being dual core, it's quad core.
yeah, and uh, I think was the battery better for the new 3DS?
Not between the two XLs, original 3DS and new 3DS. Not really.
Okay, so yeah, then there wasn't even like that big of a difference. And then to add like a cute little thing, they made the buttons A, B, X, Y into the like Super Nintendo or the Nintendo Entertainment System like logo for it, where it had like yellow, red, green, blue. They put
Right.
that on the buttons, and they were like, "Hey, throwback." And this, if you can do it on that one, but you're only allowing it on that one, the 3DS and the 2DS are still like,
Relevant?
yes, like I still play mine. They're still releasing games that are coming out for both systems, and then they did that stupid thing where what was it, Xenoblade Chronicles was only going to be able to be played on the new 3DS and not the other ones, which
Honestly, I'm okay with. And it turns out that's actually an inferior version when compared to the Wii version. They had to lower the resolution of the textures. But the we've talked about this one before, the Hyrule Warriors Legends. How that's, according to some reviews, that's practically unplayable on the 2DS and 3DS. Runs fine on the new one.
yeah. And then you know, like you said, you weren't planning on getting one because it's kind of like a protest to it. Like it doesn't make sense, and I'm not going to buy into your just wanting more of my money, so I'm not going to do it. There's a new portable gaming system coming out next year, along
Yeah.
with the NX.
Yeah.
So anyone who bought the new 3DS, which was like what last year it came out, I
I
think.
think so.
Yeah, it's like just why? Why? There's a brand new one coming out, and it's not even like at this point I don't even want to like take people saying like, "Oh, I didn't know that." Like they didn't say anything about it. It's like, look at the pattern for all Nintendo portable gaming systems. There's like a 2 or 3 year like gap in between their newer consoles. And we haven't even left the DS. Like we're still on the DS line.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like gotten better and better every 2 years by like lighting and processing. This is. I'm hoping that this new one, you know, something new, aesthetically looking wise. I Not that there's anything wrong with the DS. I actually prefer the 2DS other than a 3DS. Just the way that it holds. I like it a lot better. It's got a better feel to it. Um, but just something new. You know, we didn't just stick with the Game Boy. It wasn't just. I mean, we did for a little bit because it was like Game Boy, then Game Boy Color, and then there was like giant brick Game Boy, and then we went to Game Boy Advance,
Mm-hmm.
and then SP, which Game Boy Advanced and SP they could play the same games.
Right.
The only difference is that the SP flipped and it had a built-in light, whereas the Game Boy Advance you had to like purchase a light if you wanted to play at like night, or if you were like driving in cars. Like I traveled a lot as a kid, and my two friends would travel with us a lot. They had Game Boy Advances, and they had to buy lights because most of our driving was at night, so they couldn't play their games or do anything unless they had like that light plugged into their system. I had an SP. I just had a light built in, but I could play the exact same games as them.
Right. And you got that rechargeable battery.
Yeah. And there was even like a wireless connection thing that you
Yeah.
could plug to the back.
Those are the right reasons to make a new model of the same of the same video game system. I've noticed that whenever they the better a system sells, the more likely they will go ahead and release a new version of it. Whether it's more power efficient or if you make a revision to something, that's fine. Like the Game Boy Advance SP is a revision of the original Game Boy Advance with this PlayStation 4 Neo and Xbox One Scorpio and new 3DS. You work, and then to take something like the Super Nintendo games and make an artificial reason to buy a new one as this is your price point when your original model could run it just fine. I just don't know who they're trying to fool with this. But I'm not going to fall for it.
Yeah. If they had just made, I don't know. I'm really like I'm trying to think of a reason that the 3DS is relevant as far as like why they should have made it, and I guess to like make those games better in a little bit. That would have been fine
A lot of people
if it had just been like uh just a newer model because they were trying to keep up with better gaming, and they kind of just did something, not like a drastic change to the entire like design of the DS, like they did with Game Boy Advance and Game Boy SP, but only made it beneficial. Like there's only a good reason to get this new system. Um, I guess it would have been a little bit relevant, but the fact that it's pretty much the exact same thing, but they're choosing not to sell games, or they're choosing to only sell games on that when the two versions, which are only a year and a half younger than it, is stupid. And that's another reason why I'm a little afraid of the PS4 Neo and the Xbox Scorpio, the Xbox One Scorpio, or if it's just Scorpio, because they can totally do that if they want to.
mm-hmm.
They've well, at least the Sony, they've said that they're not going to do that. They're going to make sure that when the Neo comes out, you can, if you have it, and if you have the PS4, all games that they're going to be producing are going to be playable for both consoles. But they'll have an option to switch it to the PS4 Neo system. What's stopping them from making it completely exclusive? And just because they say that, they could say that and start out doing that, and then maybe like a year and a half or 2 years later, they're just like, well, it's been a while. PS4 has been out for maybe 4 years. The PS4 Neo's only been out for like 2.5. Everyone's got to have one now, so let's just start making things exclusive for that. Like they can totally do that if they want to. Xbox Scorpio or Xbox can totally do that. They're following Sony because they're competitive. That's what they're going to do. They're going to try and better each other. I just really hope that if one of them does that, even if it's Sony that decides not to do that, Microsoft decides to do it, at least there's someone who won't just be that guy.
And remember, with these, what was the biggest complaint about the PS4 and Xbox One when they first came out? There was not that big of a leap in graphical prowess for these consoles compared to the previous generation, which, mind you, the Xbox 360 launched in 2005. And then 8 years later, in 2013, we get the PS4 and the Xbox One. And 8 years difference wasn't that much as far as processing power in the consoles. Like, to me, it's like, okay, you're never, if you go down this route of releasing a new system every couple of years, you really want to see a lack of leap in graphical fidelity, go this route. We're never going to have that again. It's like, why bother making a new 3DS when you can just hold off a couple of years and release your next generation of handheld. Don't do this thing where you are splitting the user base and you're basically saying, oh, well, you have to have this little upgraded system to play this graphically demanding game. Just release it on the next one.
Yeah.